Welcome everyone to the security panel for this year. And this year I'm really delighted to see how many distinguished panelists we have here. So I'm really hopeful that you will all grab this opportunity to ask your questions, and I'm sure you're going to get great answers. I'm Michael Anneberg. I work as an IT Pro evangelist out of Sweden, and for this particular year I was asked to be the security track owner here at IT Forum. So I hope that you enjoyed the security sessions. And you know, whether you enjoy them or not, please pass all the feedback that you have back to us, and we'll make sure to make it even better for you this next year. So when you came in, there were papers on your chairs. Please use those. If you don't want to shout out your questions, write them down, hold your paper up in the air, and someone in the room will pick them up and pass them forward, and we'll ask them to the relevant speaker. So with that, I pass it to my other moderator colleague here, Ronnie.
So thank you, Michael. So what we'll now do is go through the introduction of the panel. So we have a nice gang lined up here, so they actually don't need more introduction, but I'm still going to ask them to introduce themselves. And please, while you do that, also explain us which kind of security threats are really keeping you awake at night. So, Rafał, can you kick off?
All right, so good morning. My name is Rafał Łukawiecki, or Rafał Łukawiecki if you speak Polish. I don't work for Microsoft like a few people here on the panel. That's a good thing because we'll tell you truth and only the truth. And the thing that I am most interested
You failed already.
Ignore him. I think many of you who have met me know that the thing in security that interests me most is how we can apply cryptography and those strange things that cryptography comes with to make the environment more secure and to make it easy, really.
Okay, that was a good introduction. Okay, I'm the next external. I'm Marcus Murray, working at TrueSec. I think what I can contribute to this discussion is the fact that I work in both security and penetration testing, and I spend like 95% of my time in the field. So I implement security and also break security. So I think that's, and I will tell you the truth already, no problem. I'll even tell you when he's lying.
I'm Steve Riley. I'm from Microsoft, the company that you love, or love to hate. I don't know which it might be. I work in the Trustworthy Computing Group. We are responsible for all security in the organization. I don't know if there's anything in particular that keeps me up at night other than insomnia. The area that I like to spend most of my time concentrating on is how we can improve security processes and the mechanisms we use to be secure, because ideally, once you get that down, it doesn't really matter what technology you use.
Okay, hi, I'm Laura Chappell, and I'm the founder of Wireshark University, and I do network forensics and some host forensic work. I also work in the area of internet safety for kids, and that's probably the thing that keeps me up at night is some of the predators that locate the children on the internet. Would you like mine?
Sure. Well, I'm Mark Rusinovich. I work at Microsoft. I've only worked there for a little over a year, so I still tell the truth most of the time. What keeps me interested, I'm working on security in Windows and looking forward, and one of the big areas that I focus on is zero-click malware, how to defend our systems against that, applications like Office and Internet Explorer, and so that you can browse to unsafe places and not be afraid of being compromised.
Right, thank you, speakers. To get things started, we have some questions that were submitted online here earlier, and I'm actually going to kick it off with Steve Riley. Because a lot of these people here, the audience, I think are going to ask our panelists here technical questions, but there's something that's also very, very important when it comes to security, and that's process. So, Steve, you're a very known speaker for Microsoft when it comes to technical audiences, but you actually also sometimes, or quite often actually, speak about process and why that's important. So could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, like I said earlier, that's kind of an area of research of mine and interest. I see wonderful security technologies implemented in very poor ways all the time. When I visit customers, even when I read about things in journals, people are taking this piece of technology without understanding how it addresses risk, throw it in place, assume that it will work, and in reality, because you didn't understand the risk it addressed, the technology could enable a bad guy to launch an attack. So even though I come from a technology company, I've come to the conclusion that the technology is less important than your understanding of how it will solve a problem, your understanding of what those problems are, and your awareness of what the risks that you face. It's a conversation I constantly have with people on the news groups is, don't turn that feature on, go back to the default. You don't need it. Like SSID hiding, right? You don't need to hide your SSIDs. Leave it at the default of broadcast and use WPA or WPA2. And people are like, well, but wait a minute, it's a security feature. We should switch it on. No, you shouldn't. You use security features only if they solve a risk that you have. And the only way you can address risk is by having a process that can help you do that. Once you've got a good process, when you understand where your own threats lie, like I said in the introduction, it doesn't really matter what technology you use in this case, because whatever you pick, you will implement correctly. So yeah, I come to technical conferences and I give presentations involving a large part of process and people, because good security involves all three.
So thank you, Steve. So the next question is dedicated to Laura. So Laura, people have heard your sessions about forensics and they want to know what they need to do to get started. And are there any forensics for dummies guides, or is this really something you have to do with professionals?
Shall I just talk into his lapel mic? No. The area of forensics, obviously, there are two areas in forensics when we're talking about digital forensics. One is host forensics, where we're looking at the drive of the person of interest, and then there's also the network forensics side, which is listening to the traffic. I live primarily in the area of network forensics, looking at the attacks on the cabling system, identifying signatures. What I would do probably to start out with is make sure that you have a very clear understanding of how TCP/IP communications works, and start running some of the attack tools and gather your own trace files. I was saying that in the session earlier. You go and you download, let's say, NetScan tools. You download NetScan tools and you're going to do a reconnaissance or a trace back on a target system. You should be gathering your own traffic so you know what that tool looks like when it's running across the cabling system. And then you can identify it when somebody else is using that tool against you. Same thing with Nessus. Every time I play around with Nessus and some new plugin is out there, I'll run an analyzer on that Nessus box and look at the traffic, and there is the signature for that particular tool. So the best way to get into this, and it's not only network forensics but also troubleshooting, is you need to start looking at your own traffic. Go web browse and see what it looks like when you web browse. Go back to the same site again.
How do you do that, Laura? How do you generate traffic that you look at? You told us earlier.
How do I generate? Oh, no, you're talking about that one tool?
Yeah, it starts with a W, O-W, World of
Oh, World of Warcraft. Oh, stop. I have a wonderful job. I have a wonderful project right now which has to do with hacking World of Warcraft. So right now I am working on character flaws, which is my son plays, and I'm trying to change his list of weaponry that he has by hacking his connection. I should say, I was just talking with Mark, I play with my son. I am a young boy also, supposedly. He thinks I am. And I play with him. And the funny thing is, when I change and I come over and I say, okay, I'm going to play as mom, I will start an attack using MacOff. Those of you that saw the MacOff in the other room, I'll start a MacOff attack on his hardware address, and I can run across the field, and he can't even shoot at a rabbit. It's fabulous, fabulous. So look at your own traffic. Start looking at your own traffic, and it's the best way. It's the best way to learn this stuff.
I think after that answer, probably the follow-up would be, are you hiring? A lot of people would want to work with hacking World of Warcraft, I guess. Do we have any questions from the audience? There are also microphones standing at the side in case that you don't want to write it down or you don't have a pen. You can also walk up to a microphone. I don't see any hands right now, so let's continue with Mark then. Many people are isolating untrusted software in VMs. What are the risks of malicious software breaking out of a VM?
Let me see if this, can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Is mic okay? So the question was about risks of running untrusted software within a VM, which I've done in the past as well. There's a different risk surface between running something inside of a VM and running it on a physical machine, and that's because the VM isolation is implemented in software with the virtualization stack. In the case of Server 2008, for example, it would be the hypervisor. And that kind of leads me into Microsoft's direction on virtualization, which is a very thin, small hypervisor that we can do a serious code review of and penetration testing of and threat analysis of, as well as the connections between the guest VMs and the host VMs. So the bottom line is if you're really worried about the risk, you should put it in a physical machine. When it comes to a virtual machine, the same physical threats are there, but then in addition, you've got the risk of somebody exploiting a flaw in the virtualization software to break out of it, which hopefully is small, but nevertheless real.
If I can just add one other aspect of it, what I'm seeing a lot is use of virtualization to isolate applications so it is easier to study the application's behavior. And that is a very interesting new security technique. Whereas in the past you ran many different applications co-located on one naturally physical machine, you have an awful lot of background noise, which makes it a little bit more difficult to see what constitutes normal or abnormal behavior, for example, in terms of traffic of a given application. And if you want to use any of the probabilistic or statistical tools, such as data mining of the information stream that comes out of the application in terms of performance logs, traffic logs, or even transactions executed, then virtualization allows you to do that very neatly, because you can have application per VM, and you will really understand what's normal and abnormal, so it's easier to raise an alarm. I think it's a very, very new technique, and one that we'll probably see more use of in the future.
So thank you, Rafał. So I want to stay with you for the next question. So I have a question on the user account control, and the question, is it really effective when you're running as admin? So people will just still see those OK buttons and just click on it, and social engineering will be around the corner. Any comments?
Well, first of all, I'm glad you said this admin, because certainly user account control is, I think, primarily a very important technology for the end user, for people for whom we prepare the systems. From admin perspective, it's a little bit more of a mixed message, I guess. I think it depends on really who you are and how used you are to your system. I really do not mind if you, as an admin, by following all the other good rules, such as not using the admin account for your day-to-day work, having a dedicated machine, etc. I don't mind really if you don't use it. On the other side, I do. It's necessary to state that user account control is not a security boundary as such, so relying on it ultimately is not necessarily a good thing from your perspective. But there is another aspect of it. I think that it's kind of interesting to get used to that rhythm that UAC throws. And I've been trying to use it for about 6 months. And I've gotten used to it so much that when I do something that doesn't actually pop up that box, I kind of feel that something's missing, and vice versa. If that pops up, I do feel that something else is happening. However, look at the way UAC works in Windows Server 2008, and look at the whole concept of a split token, because then potentially there is a little advantage to UAC on an admin account, where it can prevent some of the silent installations of software. Admittedly, if the malware is very cleverly designed, then it will be able to bypass it on those machines, especially if it is a targeted attack. So I think mixed message. I think you should run with it at least for a while. You should try it, consider on Windows Server 2008, and definitely keep it for your normal users on the corporate network.
So if I can follow up there, the user account controls design is not anti-malware. So I wouldn't use it as a tool to defend yourself against malware. Any legacy malware that expects administrative rights is going to break with user account control on. But new malware that knows about the fact that it's not a security boundary can take advantage of the elevations and hijack your machine. And I talked about this in my user account control articles and presentations here at IT Forum. The fact of the matter is it's anti-admin software. The user account control's purpose is to make an environment where all Windows users are standard users, so that all ISVs have to assume that their software is going to be running a standard user and make sure it works that way, so that we can all move our desktops, especially important in the enterprise, to standard users, whereas before on Windows XP we really had no hope because of all this misbehaved software. Personally, my recommendation to you is, if you feel some comfort in the fact that user account control elevations break legacy malware, turn off the elevation, turn user account control into the silent elevation mode. You'll still break the legacy malware, but you won't get the prompts, and you're really not doing anything anyway when you get one of those pop-ups in defeating really targeted user account control aware malware that might want to hijack an elevation. But the bottom line is, if you're running as an admin and getting prompts, you're an admin. And if you really care about security, you should be running as a standard user and switching to a separate account to elevate to admin rights.
Yeah, I totally agree with Mark's last thing. I mean, when I look at how I do it myself, I have two accounts on my computer. I have a regular user and local admin. And I actually renamed the local admin. He is configuration change account. I never use it for anything else than reconfigure my system. So it's a mental thing for me. I mean, if it's administrator, I'm just going to log on because I always did that. It's easy to use that account. That is computer reconfiguration account. The other one is the user account. And I think that is a good sell for your employees as well, or your colleagues, friends, whatever. It's easier than the UAC. It's too much decisions. Either you're reconfiguring your system or you're using it as a user.
Right, thank you. Oh, was a follow-up?
Yeah, that's all right if you're, that's all right if you're an individual user, but I like have tens of thousands of systems. No, really not. But still, I have a lot of systems, so I have a lot of accounts. And my question sort of goes more to the meta plane of this. Has any of you sort of given any thought to what kind of model in order to the end user experience, like developers who needs special rights and stuff, and to the security boundaries, and how you sort of balance those two in forms of being effective, being cost effective in terms of how much time you spend? Because if I add up the seconds I use to sort of switch accounts, it becomes a problem.
If I can immediately jump here, as I work a lot with developers and developers in the security area especially, I do like all developers, first of all, to be on an isolated domain. Secondly, I prefer their development environment to consist at least of two separate computing environments. One which is the development machine, the other one is the testing and possibly staging device. The development machine will actually not be a member of the domain. It will be completely separate, isolated, traffic protected, and on that the developer can do whatever they want. And believe me, I hardly ever see user account control switched on that machine. Developers really, really don't like working with it for all sorts of reasons. In fact, if you try deploying a local ASP application, you just get so bombarded with work that it's not conducive to work. However, from the moment they go into the testing or staging environment, at that point, we lock that down. At that point, there are no admin rights allowed for any of the developer. Everything has to be running on standard accounts, very low privilege account. And the further they move down the line in the corporate environment, the more, of course, it becomes what you would expect and what my colleagues have described.
Okay. Here's a question that's right down your alley, Steve. ISO 2006 would publish applications behind the corporate firewall or directly connected to the internet. What do I tell the management? I know you used to talk a lot about this a few years ago.
Tell management what?
Whether the ISO server should be directly connected to the internet.
Oh, sure, yes, it's a firewall. Firewalls always are directly connected to the internet, right?
So
Yeah.
no other firewall in between.
No other firewall between. Let me give you a brief understanding. Who asked the question? I want to actually look at your face. Okay. Let me give you a brief understanding of what happens. When you install ISO server on a Windows computer, it actually inserts filter drivers beneath TCP IP and the inspection drivers above it. And the filter driver that's sitting beneath IP will not allow a packet into the box unless it matches a rule that has been designed to permit inbound traffic. So imagine for a moment that you have one publishing rule that permits inbound HTTP and HTTPS, right? So on the wire, that looks like port 80 and port 443. If someone tries to throw malicious RPC traffic at the external facing interface of your ISO server, which is directly connected to the internet, the packet filter driver won't allow that in because it does not match one of the rules. So it silently drops it. It doesn't send back a reset. I can't envision at all why you would have any other firewall in front of that computer, because the other firewall would actually be paid in exactly the same way. The times that I have consulted with customers, my consulting days are kind of over, right? I do this full time. But in the time period when I was consulting with customers and we would build environments like this where ISO server was directly connected to the internet, I've remained in contact with those customers over the years and have asked them if they've ever had any successful attacks of the ISO server, and no one has. So I think that is kind of a pretty good track record, and I have no worries about recommending it directly connected now.
I know that, but the thing is, they want to tell the management It's a political question, more or less.
You tell management that a guy at Microsoft who is known for telling the truth and bleaches his hair told you this. Actually, what I would suggest is it depends on how technical your management is. None at all. Then you can't use the example I gave you of how layered device drivers work and things like that. Instead, you're going to have to talk about the track record of the product and how Microsoft themselves has been able to demonstrate through customer research, not through us pulling numbers out of our ass, but through customer research, that the product is sound and has not been broken. If that won't work for you, I'm not sure what else will.
A new job.
A new job might, right?
I want to add.
And so the only thing I would recommend is you have to capitulate and put something else in front of it. A hub work. Yes.
Tell them it's a firewall.
Yeah.
I have two additions because it's the only way to make him stop talking is just to override.
No, I was done.
Okay, you were done. One thing, a comment to the management thing. If you want to talk to the management about this, tell them it's cheaper with one firewall than two. That works.
That's good. Yeah.
And another thing about the ISA and the vulnerabilities that is non-existent. I just have some experience from a customer case, and it's pretty interesting because they had this ISA thing set up, and they wanted us to make sure whether or not it was secure. And the thing is that they had this custom ISAPI filter to improve security that did some extra checking, and that filter had buffer overflow. So actually, because they implemented that extra security measure, we could own the ISA server. There was no problem at all in the Microsoft product ISA server. It was in a filter they made themselves. So you should always think about what applications you're adding to that ISA server, what you're exposing. A hacker will look for every entry point possible.
And because I haven't spoken for a while, I can only add that the same applies to almost any security measure in cryptography. Please never improve cryptography with some especially extra security cryptography, because it almost always and almost absolutely always will break your security altogether. Just stick to one nice good one that you like and knows that works.
Keep on talking, Rafael, because I have another question for
you.
you. So we have somebody in the audience who want to know whether his data is really, and he mentions totally secure if he implements EFS, BitLocker, and CRM. I believe he means rights management.
No. Well, it's all a question of probability. In our business of security, there is never, ever that perfect 100% security.
Oh, but I think Oracle would disagree with you.
Well, let them. Okay, so there's marketing security and there is real security. So perhaps I shouldn't be saying that to you in this dramatic voice if you happen to be working in marketing, because for you we have perfect security, and of course we will sell it to you very happily, and it is 100% and it's wonderful. Now, when we talk to technical people who understand what security is about, you understand it's a matter of probabilities, and it's a matter of how determined the attacker is. If you are talking here about a casual thief, say, in this lovely city, picking up your laptop like I've already lost a few, well, I kind of don't feel very bad about it. So what? They took the laptop, it's got a bit of BitLocker. There are indeed some additional things which were coming from a server with EFS, and I would be extremely surprised if they got to see any of my naughty pictures. I don't think that will happen. So, if you think of it that way, you cannot ever answer that question unless you have done some threat modeling or some analysis of the landscape of who wants your data. If you are carrying nuclear secrets of the most important device currently being built on this planet, then I would definitely say that the mechanisms mentioned right now will be seriously not enough, because in fact it's not the laptop that has the value, it's really you they would go for. So think about it that way. No, there's no perfect security. But the combination that you have suggested is very much the, belt suspenders and braces and whatever else you want to have of it. So for most purposes, it probably will be more than enough.
Right. One for you, Laura, that came from the audience. Have heard this week. In one session they said peer-to-peer is good. In another session they said that peer-to-peer is bad, which is true.
Ah.
Good.
We need a, oh. So in one, It wasn't me that said peer-to-peer was good. I know that.
I did say that. It's good.
You said it's good?
Yeah.
Well, thanks for the laptop, and I did get those dirty pictures. You look good. All right.
Dirty pictures of yourself?
Well, there were some farm animals, but you know.
You didn't like the junker.
Oh, okay, that was sick. Okay, okay, we probably come at this from a different angle. I come at it from a traffic standpoint, looking at doing traffic analysis and troubleshooting and data paths and things like that. You know, in the last session, I was just talking about the fact that BitTorrent is like a pit bull. You know, you've got BitTorrent set up on a system, and even if you uninstall BitTorrent, you're still going to be recognized by other BitTorrentians out there in the world, and they're still going to be coming in and trying to connect to you and talk to you because they still think you have BitTorrent. You're on a static list now. And the only way to get rid of that problem is to give that IP address to a friend, install it on their system, you know, get them set up with that address and move on to a new one. So now they're in that world and dealing with it. I have always...
That's why I got naked pictures of her falling out on my computer.
And yours are in high def. Anyway, so I look at it very much from a troubleshooting standpoint. You know, we put in security protections and measures where we do authentication and things like that. And the idea of users going and installing peer-to-peer communications amongst themselves and doing data sharing amongst themselves is not really a secure model to do it that way. And we've seen that before with people that are moving data around using LimeWire and eBoulevard BearShare and that overnet piece of garbage. If anybody has that, you practically have to reformat your drive to get rid of overnet. So that's the standpoint. That's where I come from. It's just horrible traffic, typically unoptimized, and then there are some security issues as well.
So, obviously, I have to say something now. If you want to know how you can quickly and easily rein in some of your peer-to-peer network, do come to my session this afternoon, where I will be talking about next generation of networking Windows Server 2008, and I will show you a lovely, cute little demo where I'll enable quality of service measurements in order to contribute a little bit to resolving that problem. Now, I absolutely agree with Laura from the security perspective, and since it's security panel, she really should win now. However, flying, riding motorcycles, and even using cars is also inherently insecure, and nevertheless we do it. I strongly believe that peer-to-peer is the future of an awful lot of applications as yet to be created, probably for your networks and by people who pay your salaries often. I believe that peer-to-peer as a model will be something we will just have to understand better and secure it as the time goes on. So I can explain myself, that's pretty much the angle I was coming out. And when it comes to security, she's right.
So thank you. Next question for Mark. So we talk a lot about how security threats are moving up the stacks from the operating system to the application, but what, when it happens in the other way around, what are actually the risks on that, on security threats on the CPU itself, on the virtualization piece, or on the hypervisor stuff?
So actually I know that what originated this question, and that's all the hype around hyperjacking, to use a little pun there. If you're familiar with what happened at Black Hat this year and last year with Joanna Rutkowska, how many people heard about this, the blue pill attacks, where she postulated at some point earlier this year that it's possible to make a hypervisor-based rootkit that is undetectable. And she actually went to Black Hat, was challenged to come up with that, and another team was challenged to come up with a detecting mechanism. She gave a talk about how she would write this blue pill 2 and actually published a proof of concept, but she actually left out or didn't address one of the detection mechanisms that's the simplest for knowing whether you're running on top of a hypervisor. And this addresses only the scenario of, I've got a machine, it's got hypervisor-based support in the CPU, and I'm not running on a hypervisor. I don't expect to be running on a hypervisor. So the question is, am I running on one? Because if I am, that means I've been hyperjacked. And the simple approach to detecting it is simply to use timing. There are certain instructions that you execute that have to be intercepted by the hypervisor layer, and that interception costs significant performance degradation on those instructions. So simple timing mechanisms, by going out to a remote time server, she postulated a way to defeat that. Having a second core, and all machines now are multi-core, having a second core that is doing the timing for the first core she didn't have an answer for that one. And so detecting whether in a hypervisor-based, on a hypervisor rootkit, when you don't expect to be running on a hypervisor, that's not an issue as far as I'm concerned. It's possible to detect. Now, the bigger problem I see is you expect to be running on a hypervisor. Is it malicious hypervisor? And more systems are going to be running on a hypervisor, and you're going to want to ask that question. But I think before you get all worked up over, am I running on a malicious hypervisor, not a real one, there's two angles to this. One, there's no such thing as a malicious piece of software that has no discernible side effects. So if you know what you're looking for, you will always be able to find it because somebody's analyzed it and looked for side effects, and that's the way the anti-malware industry actually works. The second question is, how did it get there in the first place? And that's when your layered defenses have to be there to protect against that. So the only way to get a malicious hypervisor on the machine is to have the part of the system that's able to inject a hypervisor onto the machine running with that, be infected at admin rights level, and then also be able to control the boot process of the operating system to get that hypervisor in. So if you've gotten to that point where you're able to be compromised to that level, you should be asking yourself, do I have malicious software on that system at all, in user mode or in kernel mode? And if you can't answer that question with 100% certainty, then hypervisor-based rootkits are kind of a second-order concern.
Thank you. Now we actually have some people at the mics, and I think you, sir, have been waiting the longest. We'll start with you.
Thank you. You're talking now about malicious hypervisor software. What are your thoughts about counter malware software? Like I understand that Symantec is looking into some antivirus software on that level. Is that?
So I think you're talking about Symantec solution where they would have a separate virtual machine that is monitoring
exactly
the host operating system.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on
from
that?
the outside? What I think is that those solutions are ultimately intractable and increase your risk surface area. It's really hard to understand what's going on inside of another OS from the outside, especially at the virtualization layer that they would want to operate at. It's much easier to understand what's going on from inside, and it's not clear that you're really getting an advantage from the outside. Now you've got this extra piece of software you've got to manage, you've got to patch, you've got to update, and this introduced complexity and performance degradation, and I don't personally see the value in that kind of solution.
Did you tell them that? Could you all tell them that, please?
In here, then I'm telling you that.
Okay. Another person at another mic.
Yeah. Hello. You talked about the cycles, CPU cycles for the hypervisor. Now, for all the virtual machines for VMware and also Microsoft Virtual Server, for the performance and monitoring, you need to install the VM toolkit, and for the Microsoft Virtual Service, you need the Microsoft counterpart. Because then you can monitor, and for the performance, it says so, performance, and it's also needed for the CPU cycles to for the CPU for the virtual machine to use. And I was thinking there should be, or there could be, a way to hack that specific tool, because you don't. When you install it, you have to install it in the virtual machine. It doesn't run on admin. It's a part. I think it's part of the core when you're installing it in the virtual machine. And do you know any method to hack that? Because if you hack that, you have control over all your virtual machines, over your management console, and over that you can bypass to all the virtual machines.
Yeah, that's part. When I answered the question earlier about risk of running with virtual machines, that's part of the surface area, that virtualization software stack. For example, and what you're talking about is the guest enlightenment software, the virtual drive device support that's put inside of the guest operating systems. On Virtual Server 2008, there's a virtual bus driver and there's virtual device drivers. And again, that is a serious consideration when you're virtualizing something, is making sure that whoever's implemented that software has done a good threat analysis and followed the secure development lifecycle practices of making sure that they're coding to the same security measures that the operating system itself is coded to. And so I can't speak for VMware, but for Server 2008, there's been extensive penetration testing. SDL has been used in all of those pieces of software. Every path has been looked at very closely to make sure that at least we're very confident that there's not a way to hack, even if that guest OS is compromised at the admin level, to hack through and get access to the host partition. That said, there's always the possibility of implementation flaws, and both we and VMware have released fixes for flaws in that kind of software. With Server 2008, which is still under development, we're even more confident that we're getting it right.
Okay, thanks.
Right. Another question from the audience, and even though I know that some of you probably are more opinionated on it than others, I've addressed the entire panel. So, does the panel recommend IPsec internally? What are the ramifications for protocol analysis, and what protection will that offer? Blaster will still work? No.
I'm going to say, unless we have an understanding of the threats that you have in mind, we can't give you an answer. So who asked the question? What do you want to protect against? Microsoft. Yeah, I'm sorry, you can't.
If we have guest computers on our network, they may only want to talk to certain devices, and also to potentially stop client-to-client communication.
So you want to use it to prohibit communications between computers that don't recognize each other. That's exactly what the authentication function does. And if you have a worry about unauthenticated computers, this is one mechanism you can use, and we've actually documented that a few years ago in a procedure called domain isolation. Yeah, in that case, I do recommend it. Now, what you will use is ESP null, so it's clear text, no encryption, and a lot of protocol analyzers do know how to peer into ESP null because it's still clear text. You're only taking advantage of the authentication function. If you do need to encrypt, on top of that, which generally you don't need to do on a corporate network, but maybe if it's communication to the HR database, possibly, that has implications on forensics, like maybe you can't, right? But that's the security trade-off that you make.
Okay, Marcus, I have a question for you. So in security, perception is everything. And so sometimes things have a huge security perception, and people don't ask any questions anymore. So have you seen any cases in practice where you have like high-end security systems, but which were not secure at all?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like for example, me and my colleague Hassan, we did this kind of military governmental thing. It was an external pen test, and all they gave us was one IP address. And they told us that we have this field application that is very important, and they communicate through this server with this IP address. We want to make sure that nobody from the internet can attack this platform. We had totally no hands tied at all. We could do whatever we wanted to compromise that system. And the first thing, I mean, we really thought, oh my God, this is going to be so difficult. They gave us so much time, and we're going to fail, probably. But the DNS address of the system exposed the name of the application. That's really bad, because we could actually find the company producing this one. It was something like a military company or something. We started calling them over and over. Hello, I'm from the university. I'm doing this study. Can we come over, look at this application, talk to the guys who developed it, something. We didn't get to the application. We couldn't. So we were even more confident. This is really a secure thing. You know, we didn't get much from that server. It gave us one port that was open. It was like some kind of web service that we couldn't get anything from, more or less. We didn't know what it was. But we started to probe the web, just Googling for the name of the app. And after some time, we actually found a patch for that application. And I mean, it's only a patch, right? But when we started to check that patch and debug it and look what it really did, we couldn't really install it because it was only a small patch. We realized that one of the things that this patch did was actually changing the connection string that the client application used to connect to the SQL database somewhere. And that was like a SA user logon password. Because when they send out the patch, they changed that to make security better, right? If somebody would ever steal one of those like police cars or whatever that was running that client-side application. So we knew that somehow the clients are connecting to that server and they're actually using that connection string, right? So we started to think, well, how can a web service ever connect to a backend SQL thing? We knew that that service was somehow Microsoft oriented. We got that information when we looked at the application and stuff. And it was a SQL connection string, right? MS SQL connection string. So we looked at this old protocol that does like proxify, MS DSCC, I think the name is, right? So we read up on it because we'd never used it. And we created this web page that was like a client that did the connection to that proxy, and we created this forum. So you could run SQL commands on that server. We extracted the entire database. We sent it to them, like this is all the secret data, all the people involved in this, and this is and that was, if that was exposed, that would have been a complete disaster to hundreds of thousands of people, I promise you that. I'm not going to go into more detail. But what the moral of the story is, I mean, there are a few things you can learn from this. They thought they really shoved the SQL server away using some kind of proxy. But the proxy were only relaying. It didn't secure anything, really. Also, they trusted the client application. I mean, we could have our client didn't have to authenticate in any way more than the password to the SQL database. They could have changed that using PKI keys, things like that. Another thing is that if we stole one of them, police cars or military vehicles or whatever, and stole that computer, we would have had that string. It was the same string on each and every computer. It wasn't an individual logon. So there are so many flaws in that design that you could use to compromise that system. And when we started, one IP address, one port, really secure, nothing. So you need to think about the whole flow from start to the end. Never trust a client-side application. Think about what you expose to the patch. Think about how you do the authentication. They did some risk analysis. They would probably never allow that kind of thing if they really thought it through. Proxifying is not necessarily securing. Could be, but not necessarily.
Right. I'm going to turn it around a little bit here, because this conference is mostly about exercise for your brain, technology, hardcore stuff. But you, Laura, are actually giving 2 talks at this conference on something that really targets the heart, and that's child safety. And something I feel that I know that you feel very passionate about, and maybe some of the others here on the panel do too, is the fact that there are a lot of bad guys out there. Unfortunately, they're mostly guys, but in any case, they're out there, and the instinct gut reaction from many parents is unplug the computer, make sure, sell it. You know, my kids are not getting anywhere close to a computer. And this is actually something that's very counterproductive to what Microsoft is trying to achieve with, you know, software making you everything you can be and all of that. So can you elaborate a little bit about that? Why you feel so passionate about this?
Okay. All right. So the Internet Safety for Kids presentation, there's another one going on today at 1:30 in room 125. First of all, a lot of you know how I got involved in this. I was making a presentation, and the person after me, when I had finished, was talking about Operation Avalanche, which had to do with a child sex slavery ring. And so I was exposed to the stories of the kids and what they went through, and then became involved with this program, writing all of these things on Internet Safety for Kids. You know, Steve and I were talking about this before the session, that a lot of parents want to put up all these filters for the kids. You know, they want to install the parental filters, and they want to not give the kids any access to the computer at all, and they really want to cut them off. Number one, the worst thing to do is to take away the computer to your kids, because you just crippled your child. You know, every kid today has got to be able to use the internet, to know how to use technology. So we don't want to take the computer away from them. The most powerful thing we can do is educate those kids so that they understand that they don't know who they're communicating with, and not to give out personal information. We were laughing about this because I know a lot of you know that I go online as my son's best friend online, and it's actually me, and he doesn't know it's me. It's an experiment, though. I'm sure he'll probably talk about crippled for life. He's like, oh, my mother was my best friend. But you know what? It was really an experiment to see, of anybody's kids, my kids should know not to give away personal information. And to see if I could take some of the predator tactics that they were using and get information out of my son. Asking him things such as his favorite baseball team, which he said San Francisco Giants. Okay, now I know he's most likely in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then asking him his school mascot, saying I was his same age and our school mascot is stupid, what's yours? He tells me the school mascot. Now I know, because only one elementary school can have that mascot in the state. They're very careful about that. I pretty much know the school he goes to. and of course, a lot of you know the story that he began complaining about my cooking to me. I'm a kid, you know, I'm his age, and I'm writing, oh, I just got back from dinner, and he's like, so did I, but if you could call it dinner, it's like, it's like, well, what do you
Maybe
mean?
he really knows.
Yeah, really. It's like, what do you mean? He said, well, we had some brown slop. I don't know what my mom calls it. It's like, you are so never getting a car. But, you know, the most important thing we do is teach these kids, because if we sit there and we put in all this parental control and all this filtering on our computers at home, they're going to be at another computer. They're going to be at their friend's computer. The best thing is that we can teach them to understand and recognize, you know, that there are predators out there, and be careful, be aware. It's like walking around, you know, New York at nighttime in the evening. Don't be stupid. Be aware all the time, and use your brain. So that is, you know, bottom line on internet safety for kids. Hopefully I'll see you at the session.
Maybe you can actually use that comment about your cooking as to your advantage by showing it to your husband and just say, you know, you got to do the cooking because this is going to blow my cover one day.
So yeah, I have a question from Alexander Molodoi from Romania. He's there. So you're from GCAT? I thought you guys were acquired by Microsoft. Did you escape?
No, only a part of acquired that software.
Okay, so
what are you doing now?
okay. So the question is basically more political. So there were some news facts in Germany that the German government wants to spy on PCs by using trapdoors. So I would like to have an inside answer and an outside answer. So Rafael, can you start with the outside answer? What's your opinion on that?
How upset and, you know, explosive can I be, and what swear words would you allow me to use right now to express this opinion? I think this is one of the stupidest things ever to come out of absolutely anybody, and I just have not enough time to tell you from how many dimensions this is idiocy. Because this is not just spying on who they want to spy, this is also opening those computers to constant permanent surveillance of everybody else on this planet, including the ones they want to defend themselves from. This opens it up to criminals doing exactly what it is supposed to prevent. I'm not going to even talk about privacy because that died already a little bit, so let me just stop being upset at this stage.
Well, actually, you brought up something that I've been wondering about lately. What happened to the European respect for individual privacy? That used to be something that really distinguished this continent from mine. And I see it disappearing with this thing in Germany, with the cameras in London everywhere, with a comment I got on an evaluation after I gave the data protection presentation 2 days ago. Americans seem to value privacy more than Europeans do. Has something changed here in Europe where not only is there no privacy, but suddenly European citizens don't care about this anymore?
Well, we could turn it, of course, into a discussion, where did we learn about these new ideas, but we are not going to.
I'm not going to debate you on that one, no. I won't debate you on that one. Because what's frightening to me is you are looking more like.
Okay,
well,
I'm glad you are saying this, because I honestly fear that. And, you know, I have to toe a certainly careful line when I talk about information rights management and privacy, and then I don't want to say the things I want to say about DRM, for example. So all I have to, thank you, hello. So all I can do is I can say that I hope all of you, because you here, ladies and gentlemen, you are really the voice that can talk in your country to people who make the decisions. You really need to be more vocal. You need to put across what you think is happening right now. And either, if you like it, keep doing it, just don't talk to me ever again, or stop it. Because I think in a democratic system, we have the ability to change things that have gone the wrong way too far. I just hope we do it. And right now, I am a pessimist.
Me too.
Right. So I read some frustration in this question, but I'll ask it anyway. It could be that the one that wrote it need to follow up a little bit. But why is ISA 2000X, so I guess it goes for both 2000, 2004, and 2006, not working well with TCP offloading in some netting scenarios?
Don't know. Never tried it. I can't explain why.
Don't know is a valid answer.
Okay, so again, an answer maybe Marcus and Steve on IPsec. So will IPsec version 6 and IP version 6 and IPsec, sorry, And internal firewalls make traditional firewall equipment obsolete. So what is your vision on the future of this?
I don't believe in internal firewalls. That question came up yesterday at the end of my presentation on the fortified data center. Somebody asked, so you're saying that everything on the inside in that data center is in the same security zone? And I said, yeah. If I do need to separate anything, the example I gave was the database server. The only thing that should talk to the database server is the web server, nothing else. So I might have an IPsec policy between those two machines. But other than that, I don't believe that internal firewalls, especially that application, or that all attacks are at the application layer now, that internal firewalls will buy you anything other than additional complexity and more stuff to patch, up to date, and things like that.
Okay. So do you still advise internal firewalls?
I don't think internal firewalls is the right thing, but I advise isolation. And if you have good structure in your enterprise, and you really know the flow of the applications, I think you should isolate it. Because I look from the real world perspective, I'm out there doing penetration testing, and the reason I break into systems is because of the fact that there are open communication channels that I can interpret, where I can steal authentication hashes and stuff like that. They're there. If you're using IPsec and stuff like that, I can't. If you're encrypting, if you're doing authentication signature stuff, it's not going to work. I promise you, and this is a fact, I have never done an internal penetration test at any company and failed to compromise the entire corporation's IT. I have never done that, and I do this for a living. And that is not because it's really not because whether or not you have a firewall on that machine, but it's because of the fact that you have bad passwords traversing and authentication mechanisms built on the passwords traversing the wire. So I can sniff the passwords, and I can connect to that SQL server directly, wherever I am. So because of two problems, I own the SQL server, or some other server. And sometimes I see this at customer sites, it's hilarious. They have a client station. You need to log on with smart card. You have all the security features on it. But what he does every day is that he connects to this web service, okay? That one is fairly secure. But then they have this backend service that has no security at all. It's like a SQL server or middleware server or something. There might be clear text protocols going on, authentication, nothing. So I really want to have isolation. I want to isolate the client networks from the server networks. I want to expose the front-end services to the client networks so that the client can connect to them. I want to have admin networks. I want to do it dynamically. I can do it with domain isolation ++. So whenever you're an admin, you're really not on the same network as the normal client. Maybe you can VPN into them. You can do X, 802.1x, stuff like that, to get to another VLAN, because then I can't do man-in-the-middle attacks and stuff like that. There are a lot of things you can do. And I think that Steve had one perspective working at Microsoft, but I'm really at the customer locations doing this. I see the impact, and it's a combination of technology and how we use it. And it's difficult to do everything right. So I think those concepts work in the real world. It makes it more difficult for me to compromise the systems. So there is, in fact, a difference. I believe in isolation. If you're using firewalls and communication channels possible by those firewall application features, I recommend it.
And in my session this afternoon on next generation networking with Windows Server 2008, I will very happily cover, thank you, very happily cover both IPv6 and the IPsec 6, as well as some of the aspects that Marcus talked about, but from the good guys' perspective.
And I recommend you to attend that session.
Thank you.
All right, so we know where everybody's going to be then. Here's one actually specifically addressed for Rafal. As you know, one of the possible threats for the confidential information is the social engineering. How to protect the information against this kind of threat?
Well, actually, I need to relegate this question to my esteemed colleague Steve Riley, who has been talking about social engineering for many, many more years than I have. Since you asked me just very quickly, social engineering is, of course, always the best way to break anything.
But before Steve gets into that, I just want to say it's pretty funny, actually, because originally the question was written to Steve, that was crossed out and readdressed to Rafal, and now you're sending it back. So maybe the question actually...
You can't fool us. This is the one area where technology will never work. If it's getting increasingly difficult to break into the system, for most people except Marcus, apparently, why not just hack the sysadmin instead? Unless the people themselves have been trained to be aware of social engineering tactics and know how to make secure decisions, then the people will always be the way you can bypass the technology. I don't know of any way to fix that other than to do a better job of ensuring that our people know how to make security decisions and actually care that they make the right one. So one area that I've been trying to study a little bit more lately, and that I hope to maybe have a presentation on next year, is not so much on the social engineering tactics like I've talked about in the past, but on how to raise awareness, how to get people to give a damn so that they make the kinds of decisions that you would like to see them make. There was a follow-up question over here? Yeah.
I think social engineering can be addressed only by education. So the security responsible in each company must give trainings to all the employees.
Laura says death is another option.
Death is another option.
Mm-hmm.
Training doesn't work.
But let's not just get it too wrong the other way around. If we are not going to use security for confidentiality, and we are going to leave everything in the open, then there is no need for social engineering. So just to turn it around, yes, I would like you to consider using encryption more often than you do today, simply because you at least force them into the social engineering path, whilst previously you wouldn't even know perhaps about it. Classical example is, well, should I be encrypting everything using IPsec on the local network? I know that it is not always feasible, and I know that you are foregoing some forensics of your own incredibly important type, but actually I would like to see it sometimes, if anything, because it moves the security issue or externalizes it somewhere else. I don't necessarily want you to believe it will be secure because it typically externalizes it to the next weakest point. And unless you have done a security threat analysis, you will not necessarily know where that threat has gone. But it does make things better.
And I also want to add to that because I strongly believe in and agree with Steve. I think you really need to, be aware of the social engineering part. But you can add to that by adding least privileges. It's easy to social engineer yourself into owning an enterprise or the Active Directory domain if you have 500 domain admins, if you have 20. But if you look at if this guy is only doing the DNS stuff, he's only a DNS admin, you will not own the entire domain by social engineering that guy. So that will not help the problem, but it will help the effect of the problem. Limit the attack surface a bit.
Okay. I'm turning my attention back to Mark. I have two very similar questions here, and actually, if I try to summon them up, the idea here is that in some cases, malware will actually detect the fact that it's being run in a virtualized machine, and it assumes then that that is an anti-malware company trying to create a signature for that particular malware. So it goes into hiding in one way or another, or cloaks itself, so it doesn't appear to be what it is. So the questions that are a little bit different, but one would be, is it actually then safer to run in a virtual machine due to the fact that the malware will disable itself to try to protect itself, or is it just different? And the other one would be, is there a way to actually make a virtual machine not appear to be a virtual machine to malware?
Well, let me answer the second question first. Is there a way to make a virtual machine not appear to be a virtual machine to malware? That goes back to the, can I detect that I'm running in a virtual environment? And the answer is no. There's no way to definitively make a purely environment that purely looks like a physical environment. There's going to be differences in the software stack and the performance of the machine. So there's going to be a way for them to detect that they're that they're running in a virtual machine. As far as whether it's safer to run virtual machines because we're assuming that malware is smart enough to detect that it's running in a virtual machine, I can't say one way or another whether it's safe or not. You might have malware that doesn't care that it's running in a virtual machine. You might have malware that does. As we've got more and more virtual servers out there, malware is going to have to change. If it wants to penetrate those machines as well and operate inside them, then it's going to have to say, well, I'm running virtualized, but that's okay. I still want to get my job done. It's always a cat and mouse game with malware like that, whether it's going to hide or not hide. And ultimately, I think that the security analysts that are studying malware, where they know they've got a sample and they're trying to make it operate as it normally would, even if it's got anti-VM detection mechanisms in them, there's plenty of malware samples out there that already do this today, and all the security researchers at all the big antivirus companies know how to analyze it enough to be able to thwart even those detection schemes that they've got in them to make them operate as if they were on the physical box. But
thank you.
So I want to stay on the malware theme for a moment. So we have Stefan Virter, who has been monitoring the new malware tactics in things like Stormwarn. And he has serious doubts about the goodness of signature-based malware protection. And we have Jorg, who wants to know a bit more about the different, what will be the future between antivirus versus whitelisting approach. So Mark and maybe Marcus.
Yeah, actually, this is an area that I've got a special passion for. The company that I sold to Microsoft, Internal Software, the last product we delivered or that we shipped before the acquisition, just a few months before, was a product called Protection Manager. Anybody in here look at Protection Manager? So at least a couple people. And that was an enterprise whitelisting solution that we felt had characteristics that made it whitelist management a lot easier than, for example, SRP that's baked into Windows or third-party or other solutions from other companies. The anti-malware industry is under a denial of service attack, and they will admit it. Eugene Kaspersky, the head of Kaspersky Labs, in a talk he gave 3 years ago, said, "We've already lost the war against malware. We can't keep up with the bad guys. It's too easy for them to have small, targeted, stealthy types of malware that doesn't show up high enough on the radar for the antivirus industry to assign signatures and be able to detect it. There's just no way to make sure that your antivirus solutions are aware of all the software." Really, I view antivirus as your defense against malware that's prevalent enough to show up on the radar of the antivirus industry. But ultimately, I believe that when you want security against anti-malware, you need zero-click defenses like ASLR and DEP. You need firewalls. You need principle of least privilege, running a standard user. And ultimately, you want to also stop your users from intentionally running things that are malware, and that means whitelists.
Why have whitelists been so challenging to implement in customers? I was having a conversation with somebody about this just yesterday. It seems that everybody follows this idea with firewalls, right? List what's allowed, by default block everything else. Why is it a challenge to do this with applications?
One of the problems is that the applications don't identify themselves very easily.
Right.
And also the needs of the users change dynamically. So you might go to one of the examples that we had from customers as we were developing Protection Manager is they've got external third-party service providers that deliver ActiveX controls to them. And they update these ActiveX controls without any notification. You go to the site and it says, oh, you need to download the update for this. And so there's no way to whitelist that proactively without a really good way of identifying the software, which requires signing and certificates where you could say, if you sign this and it's from you, I trust you, so I'm going to automatically whitelist that. So we need reputation services. We need ways of, we need all software to be signed so that you can easily whitelist the things that you trust. We also need a dynamic feedback mechanism where if you user comes across something that they want to run that's not on the whitelist, they can send a real-time request basically to somebody that's authorized to change the policy and get back into business within a few minutes and not days and wait for group policy to roll out through the domain.
I view something like this as probably being the biggest change in the way software is installed and maintained that we've seen in the history of computers so far. This is an enormous problem. It isn't easy to solve, but I don't see any other way to go about it.
Yeah, and I've been driving actually within Microsoft to get Protection Manager into, I mean, I probably shouldn't be saying this, but delivered as a software product through Microsoft. And SRP is we're working on updating that to make it better too.
Yeah, and I just want to agree with that totally. And it makes me think about the first time I ever did any checking on this at all. And it was pretty funny because me and my colleague Asan is actually sitting over there. We wanted to understand how weak the signature-based functions are in antivirus and stuff like that. So we downloaded this Trojan application that was open source from the web, and we realized that there were thousands of them, open source Trojans that you can download. And we noticed it was made in Delphi, so we downloaded this Delphi compiler, and we just compiled it. I mean, we wanted to understand how much you need to change the source code to be undetected. So we downloaded all these different antivirus softwares from different vendors. And we thought, okay, how do you start a test like this? You start with doing nothing, right? And then in the next time you start to change a little bit of small things. So we took the source code, we compiled it, and we ran it to check that it worked. It worked. We ran it through all the different antivirus softwares, and none of them detected it. And we didn't get it.
Was this before you changed the Trojan?
We didn't change nothing. And we were like, what happened? Why is it undetected? So we did some research, and we realized that we compiled it with Delphi 2005, and the original guy compiled it with Delphi 7. So that is sometimes how hard it is to circumvent these measures. That is how much you should rely on them. I'm a whitelist guy. I don't think SRP is fantastic in the implementation right now, but I think it will raise the bar. We have some scripts where you can actually do hash rules of your entire installation. I demoed that in a session this week. It's not fantastic, but it works. I mean, you can raise the bar. It's something that you can use if it maps to your risk assessments and stuff like that. Let's add to that discussion.
We are entering a period of time here where there are going to be huge arguments between people over anti-malware. A while back, I put a blog post up that said, anti-malware, what good is it? And that was actually very interesting coming from an employee of the company who wants to sell you this stuff, I suppose. But I explained that on my own machines in my house, that I have no anti-malware installed. I rely on other mechanisms for reducing the likelihood that my computers will get attacked. Education of, well, myself, of course, and my family. And it's so far been successful. None of my machines have ever been successfully compromised with malicious software. And you'd be amazed at the comments that came back on the blog posts. It was running right about 50-50. People saying, hey, that's great, I did the same thing, and it works for me too. And the other 50% of people said, Steve, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Like I've ever heard that before, right? That anti-malware is always an important part of any layered defense, no matter how intelligent you think you might be. And there's going to be massive arguments between people over the next several years as we figure out where this technology should go, and indeed whether we continue to use it or replace it with some kind of whitelisting or something else.
I just want to add some paranoia to that. Steve has never been hacked. He never had malware on his systems. He knows that for a fact.
Yeah, scan them every few months and there's nothing there.
I guess so. And you scan them with what? Signature-based things? Come on, baby. No, I mean, I don't know. Since I do surfing and stuff from my computers at home, I don't know if I have malware on them or not. I'm not sure. Probably not, but I'm not 100% sure. I don't know. I just want to add some healthy sense of paranoia to this.
And I realize that that's there, but it's a trade-off I'm willing to make because I
don't
want it on my own
but
machine.
you just said you never had it.
To my knowledge.
You're misleading your own people, man.
Guys.
But let me ask you this question. Unless you intentionally wanted it to happen, when's the last time your antivirus software said, hey, I see something?
That happens every day. I download malware every day.
But that's your job.
Yeah.
Okay. Like I said, you know.
I can't even keep track of them. They're running around everywhere.
Okay, so we have a gentleman here at one of the microphones again, so go ahead, sir.
Before you started talking to each other, you were talking about ActiveX controls and drivers signing, ActiveX signing. Isn't it something that Microsoft should make easier to developers and maybe also cheaper if they want to do it regularly? So for an update, I understand it's rather expensive to have a signed application, a signed ActiveX control, or a signed driver, and that's why some hardware vendors say, okay, we only release an update every month, which is signed, and then every week or every 2-3 days, that's not signed, because it's too expensive. I think that's not very cooperative of Microsoft in that. What's Microsoft's vision on this?
Well, I'll address the cost of the signing, which isn't a fee you pay every time you sign. You pay a one-time, usually a yearly or 3-year fee to one of the certificate root authorities like VeriSign or Equifax for a signing certificate. And that costs typically...
And I talk about application signing.
No, I am talking about application signing, a certificate you use to sign your applications.
Yeah.
And that costs about $300.
Yeah.
I mean, it varies between $300 and $500, but about $300 a year, which I don't think is an excessive amount of money to be able to, as part of your software development environment, to be able to deliver applications that are signed. Once you've got that certificate, you can sign all you want, all year long, for free.
Maybe then it's only signed drivers, because Microsoft has to sign them?
Microsoft doesn't sign the drivers. For the type of driver signing that you're talking about, for the 64-bit driver code signing policy, where only signed code will load into 64-bit Windows kernel, the IHV signs the driver. Microsoft doesn't. They've got to have one of 5 certificates from one of 5 root authorities to be able to sign the code, but we don't sign the code.
But
the kind of signing you might be talking about is the Windows Hardware Quality Laboratory signing, which is when they send the driver into us and we test it with for reliability, and then we'll put our stamp on it and give it back to them, and that costs a few $100s as well.
Each time.
Yeah, each time. But that's not signing for identification. That's signing for basically a Microsoft stamp of good housekeeping.
I want to add to that because there was an interesting project on the web recently, and it's called ATVI. Anybody heard of ATVI? Driver? Yeah, one guy in the room. That's interesting. ATVI, I think. Yeah, and they ran this project because they wanted to run whatever they wanted, whatever driver they wanted, on a 64-bit system. So they only allow signed drivers, right? So what do you think they did? They purchased a valid code signing certificate, went through the process, so that one is trusted, and they created this driver, and the only thing that driver does is it's loading other drivers. And I think the moral of that story is that if you really want to have code signing that way and trust it, everybody has to be in the trust chain. I mean, they never checked what they are going to sign, and they never checked the code that was signed, but they only sold them a certificate for money. So that's an issue, and I know that Microsoft is not too happy about that. They revoked that certificate, and they don't like it, and they don't trust that model.
Well,
but
actually,
I mean,
Microsoft didn't revoke it. VeriSign revoked it.
Yeah, I don't think that Microsoft had anything to do with that.
Well, we did. All we did.
You did.
No, we did not revoke it. VeriSign revoked it under their own signature, the certificate granting policies, where they had considered that malware. It's not that Microsoft said this is malware. VeriSign revoked this. VeriSign came to that conclusion on their own. So I just want to...
Yeah, okay. I'm not going to go into debate with you because I know you have...
If I can diffuse that and just go back to what the gentleman said, actually the biggest portion of the cost you have when you are signing drivers or software is your own policies and your own best practices. The few $100s is insignificant compared to you having to start writing software along a certain cycle where you know who will be signing it, who approves it. That's what you should be concentrating on. The certificate is really insignificant in terms of the whole thing.
Right, thank you. We're getting close to the end of this session, and since I don't want to stand in between 350 people and their lunch, because that's probably not very healthy, we're going to take one last question from the gentleman standing over by that microphone, and then I have one question here, and then we will start to wrap up. So go ahead, sir.
Just back to the whitelisting comment, and I just like to understand if there's more technologies around analysis of behavior on systems. Because, I mean, I went to Laura's talk, which was very interesting, but it's a very human thing. You've got to be looking at your analysis yourselves. Are there any technologies that are around, like whitelisting, that is really looking at normal behavior and then starting to flag strange behavior that is cost-effective and able to go on our networks?
So about 3 years ago, I did a roadshow called Holistic Security, and I was describing a kind of a prototype of such a system. Right now, you can do it both in real time, and if you wish to do so, of course, as some kind of forensic analysis later, simply by data mining your logs of 3 characteristics, preferably some kind of a behavior application log. In other words, what does it load, what does it activate, what does it display. Secondly, the performance log of the machine, which is easier if it's virtualized rather than running natively. And the third thing, the most obvious one, is of course the transaction log, whether it is web clicks or whether it is things going to and from the database. If you observe your line of business applications over a period of about 2-3 months and account for the seasonality of data, that it behaves differently, and most of the data mining algorithms Microsoft has in SQL Server certainly will account for seasonality, you have a fairly nice understanding of what's normal and what's abnormal. You can detect the differences in real time automatically, and I have clients who do it.
Great. Thank you. All right, so I'm actually going to combine 2 things into one here, and I'm addressing the entire panel because I think that these 2 questions could actually be some quite nice input for your lunch discussion. So I hope that you bear with me. The one is that throughout the week we've seen lots of great presentation on new technology coming out, how to solve your problems in your everyday work, and yet why can technology never win a religious discussion when you discuss with the other guys? The other thing is, how do I reach users, administrators, and managers who don't care about security? I think I lost the panel. They all look very confused here now.
Here. Run hacking sessions on their face. It works. The best way of making a person aware of something is to show it to him. You know, you have a break-in, after that you buy an alarm.
I think you have to show them value of security, and value of security is not by necessarily being the insurance salesman saying, this will burn, so you better pay us some money, although that works half of the time.
Actually, you're right. You're right.
Thank you. I think you need to actually produce a good justification that security enables something that was not possible before. For example, today it takes 10 days to enable access to an application for employee X. If I deploy a simple meta-directory solution or some other integrated identity management, this will take only 1 day. Therefore, there is fewer days of downtime. Divide that by the cost of employee, lost productivity, any magic you want to, bistromatics if you really need to. An awful lot of business justifications is based on bistromatics, mathematics in a bistro, and that gives you a fairly good feeling how to start justifying that. I think economic justification of security is possible.
Absolutely. I talked about that in my first presentation here, the link between economics and security, and gave the example of how you can turn a spyware problem into an economic opportunity to save the company $83,000 a year. You got to start looking for these languages. Yeah. Don't talk about security. Talk about making money or saving money, and then you can make people care.
And that goes directly to our discussions about whitelists, because whitelists really have a total cost of ownership kind of play in an operational sense across your enterprise. If you've got employees that are whitelisted down to only run approved apps, they're not going to be running unapproved apps that are screwing with system settings and causing problems for other applications that are legitimate, that are going to ultimately generate help desk calls and cost your company money.
$75 a call.
So we are at the end of the session. We are going to give everybody still one more time to give a final word, and actually would like to hear from you. One of the biggest security promises in Vista is running on least privileges. And we would like to have some confessions. Are you guys actually running least privilege yourself? And at least also give some advice to the audience why they should do it.
Oh dear. So that depends which machine of mine would you be looking at. And certainly on the machines I've been doing a lot of demos at this conference, no, I have not done that. I have actually used probably the most insecure practices. Because when you do a demo, the only thing you care about is that the demo fails. And that will fail absolutely every possible way you never thought about.
End of sentence. End of sentence. It will fail. You just,
all right then. Well, mine didn't fail, but actually on production systems and certainly at home, and my mother's computer, bless her, 72-year-old, uses her computer very well, Lonesome Blonde recently on one of the networking sites, and she does use this privilege. Yes.
Yeah. Like I said before, I run as normal user. The local admin is the configuration account, but I have several machines. My demo machines is not my working machines. I isolate them from each other. So if I run as a local admin on that box, because it doesn't mean anything to me, I'm doing demos on it, right? So I mean, if I want to give you a comment on that, as long as you run as normal user, I will only own your user context. I will only see what you're doing in that session. I can't get to the system. I can't survive restarts easily, stuff like that. I can't take your password hashes, stuff like that, get to other accounts on that system. So you will limit the attack surface enormously, enormously.
When I use my computer, it's mostly figuring out what the computer is trying to do so that I can talk to you about it. It's very rarely that I just sit down and do traditional productivity type stuff. I run logged in as a local administrator because I'm constantly rebuilding my laptop, installing, uninstalling, trying to see how group policy things work. I leave UAC enabled, but with silent elevation. I don't want to see the prompts. However, I do like the protected mode I get from IE when I do that. The computers in my house that are used by my family, they all log into standard user accounts.
Standard user accounts in my family. I hate to say this. I have my demo machine, which of course I'm running as administrator. It's a demo machine. It's going to be wiped out when I get out of here. And on my desk at the office, my current system is not a Windows machine.
Why are you clapping?
You know what? You have to play with all the operating systems, and right now I'm just working on a project that requires a different operating system. That's it. My desktop is dynamic. It's whatever I need for that project, and that's why. So.
And does that other system have perfect security?
We're actually being pushed out for the next session. I'll just answer quickly. As you'd guess, I run as protected admin on Vista. I actually have prompts on because I want to see what prompts team experience people have. But I do so many admin things in day-to-day activities that I need to run basically in that mode.
With that, we want to thank our panel very, very much.
Thank you.